You've been celebrating Christmas your whole life, and still getting half of it wrong. From traditions that were invented by marketers to biblical scenes that never actually happened, this holiday is built on myths everybody repeats with absolute confidence. So today, we're ripping the wrapping paper off 40 of the biggest Christmas lies you've been living with. 1. Coca-Cola invented the red Santa suit. This is one of the most persistent anti-corporate myths out there, that Santa only wears red because a soda company wanted to match their brand branding in the 1930s. While Coke's ads definitely standardized the specific jolly fat man look, they didn't invent the wardrobe. Civil War-era cartoonist Thomas Nast was drawing Santa in red coats decades before Coke ever hired an illustrator. In fact, early versions of Saint Nick appeared in blue, green, and tan. But red was already becoming the dominant choice on postcards long before the first soda ad appeared. Coke just spent millions to make sure you never forgot that specific shade of red, effectively trademarking a color they didn't actually create. 2. Jesus was born on December 25th. If you showed up to Jesus' birthday party on December 25th, you would likely be the only one there. The Bible offers absolutely no date for the birth, but the clues we do have, like shepherds sleeping in fields, suggest a spring delivery. The December date was basically a corporate takeover by the church to hijack the Roman festival of Saturnalia. Pagans were already getting drunk, lighting candles, and exchanging gifts to celebrate the winter solstice, so church leaders realized it was easier to just slap a Jesus sticker on the existing party than to invent a new one. It wasn't a holy revelation. It was a strategic PR move to convert rowdy pagans without forcing them to give up their favorite week of debauchery. 3. Jingle Bells is a Christmas carol. Before you start caroling, you should know that this song was originally written in 1857 for Thanksgiving. James Lord Pierpont titled it "The One-Horse Open Sleigh" and intended it to be a rowdy drinking song, not a holiday anthem. The lyrics are literally about drag racing sleighs against other young men and trying to pick up girls in the snow. There is no mention of Santa, Jesus, presents, or miracles, just speed and crashing into snowbanks. It took decades for the song to slowly drift from a tavern banger about gambling on horses to the sanitized nursery rhyme we force children to sing every December. 4. Rudolph the Red-Nosed. Reindeer is actually a female. We have always assumed Santa's sleigh team was a boys' club, but biology completely destroys this idea. Male reindeer shed their antlers at the beginning of winter, usually by early December, while females keep their antlers until spring to protect their calves in the snow. This means that every picture you have ever seen of Santa's reindeer flying with full sets of antlers proves they are all girls. It turns out that Santa isn't led by a he, but by a team of strong females doing all the heavy lifting. It makes sense. Dragging a sleigh around the world in one night requires the kind of endurance and lack of ego that male deer just don't have in the winter. 5. The Christmas pickle is a German tradition. Many Americans hang a glass pickle ornament on their tree, believing it is an old-world custom where the first child to find the pickle gets an extra gift. If you ask an actual German about this, they will look at you like you are insane. This ancient tradition is a total myth, likely invented by sales clerks at Woolworths in the late 19th century. They imported glass ornaments from Germany, noticed the vegetable-shaped ones weren't selling, and made up a heartwarming backstory to clear out the inventory. It is purely a marketing scam that became a beloved family memory, proving that with enough confidence, you can convince people that hanging a fermented cucumber on a pine tree is deep culture. 6. The Three Wise Men. If you look closely at your nativity scene, you're looking at a biblical plot hole. The Bible never actually says there were 3 of them. It only lists 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. For all we know, it could have been a dozen guys chipping in on a group present, or just 2 very wealthy travelers. Furthermore, they didn't show up at the stable on the night Jesus was born. The scripture implies they arrived months or even 2 years later when Jesus was already a toddler living in a house. So, putting the shepherds and the wise men in the same scene is historically impossible. They never met. and Joseph probably would have appreciated the gold a lot earlier to pay for the delivery room. 7. Christmas trees used to hang upside down. We obsess over finding the perfect stand to keep the tree upright. But in the Middle Ages, specifically in parts of Eastern Europe, the tradition was completely inverted. Families would hang fir trees from the ceiling chandeliers or rafters, tip pointing down, often to keep them away from rodents or simply to save floor space. It was seen as a symbol of the Holy Trinity pointing towards humanity. If you tried this today, your family would think you lost your mind. But historically, having a tree standing on the floor is just a modern interior design choice that wastes perfectly good corner space. 8. Santa Claus is 100% Turkish. We picture Saint Nick living in a snowy wonderland at the North Pole, surrounded by elves and reindeer, but the real historical figure, Saint Nicholas of Myra, lived in what is now modern-day Turkey. He never saw a reindeer in his life, and he definitely didn't own a parka. He was a Greek bishop in a hot Mediterranean climate who was famous for giving away wealth and occasionally punching heretics in the face. The whole North Pole concept was invented later because it fit the snowy aesthetic better than a sweaty guy in a robe walking around the ruins of Lycia. We essentially gentrified Santa's location because the Arctic Circle looked better on a greeting card. 9. Writing Xmas is an insult to Christianity. You have likely heard angry relatives complain that Xmas is a modern lazy way to cross out Christ from Christmas. The truth is actually the exact opposite. The letter X isn't the English letter at all. It represents the Greek letter chi, which is the first letter of the name Christos. Using X as a shorthand for Christ has been a sacred tradition in the church for over 1,000 years, used by medieval monks and scribes to save space on expensive parchment. So, when you see a sign that says Merry Xmas, it isn't a secular war on religion. It is technically a more historically accurate and deeply religious abbreviation than writing the whole word out in English. 10. Nutcrackers are designed to crack nuts. You see these wooden soldiers everywhere, standing guard with their big teeth, but if you actually try to use a modern decorative nutcracker to open a walnut, you will likely just break the doll's jaw. The wooden figures we buy today are purely ornamental. Originally, in German folklore, they were grotesque guardians meant to scare away evil spirits with their bared teeth, not kitchen tools. Over time, they became cute toy soldiers for ballets and shelf decorations. So we fill our homes with tools that have lost their only function, proving we care more about the aesthetic of eating nuts than actually eating them. 11. Jesus was not born in a stable. The classic nativity scene with the wooden barn and the animals is based on a translation error that has persisted for centuries. The Greek word kataluma, often translated as inn, actually means guest room. Joseph was returning to his ancestral village, so he would have stayed with family, not checked into a Motel 6. Since the guest room was already full of other relatives, Mary and Joseph likely stayed in the lower level of the house where animals were brought in at night to keep them safe. So, Jesus wasn't born in a lonely barn because a rude innkeeper slammed the door. He was born in a crowded family living room surrounded by curious cousins and goats. 12. Black Friday is the busiest shopping day of the year. Retailers love to hype up the day after Thanksgiving as the ultimate consumer apocalypse, but statistically, it is rarely the biggest day for sales. The actual champion is usually Super Saturday, the last Saturday before Christmas. That is when the real panic sets in. Black Friday is mostly a media stunt filled with doorbusters to get people to camp out on sidewalks for cheap TVs. The real money is spent by the procrastinators who realize on December 21st that they have bought absolutely nothing and are willing to pay full price just to avoid showing up empty-handed. 13. Mistletoe is a romantic symbol of love. Before you pucker up for a kiss beneath this festive greenery, you should know that the name mistletoe roughly translates from Anglo-Saxon to dung on a twig. This is because the plant spreads through bird poop. Birds eat the seeds and then deposit them on tree branches where the parasite grows. That is right. Mistletoe is a parasitic vampire that sucks the life out of the host tree. The association with fertility and kissing comes from Norse mythology and Druid rituals. But purely from a botanical standpoint, you are standing under a ball of bird droppings and parasitic vines. It is perhaps the least romantic organism on the planet, yet we decided it was the perfect spot for a holiday smooch. 14. The war on Christmas was actually started by Christians. While modern pundits scream about coffee cups, the only people in history who legally banned Christmas were the Puritans in the 17th century. In Boston, celebrating Christmas was a criminal offense punishable by a fine. They viewed the holiday as a papist abomination filled with unholy drinking and gambling. For decades, if you were caught singing a carol or eating a mince pie in Massachusetts, you weren't just frowned upon. You were fined 5 shillings for public disorder. So the original cancel culture for Christmas didn't come from atheists or other religions. It came from the most devout Christians who thought your holiday joy was a ticket to hell. 15. The candy cane has zero religious meaning. You have probably heard the sweet little story that a candy maker invented the cane to represent Jesus. The J shape stands for Jesus, the white for purity, and the red stripes for his blood. This is total fiction invented heavily in the 20th century to make candy seem holy. In reality, candy canes started as straight white sugar sticks for bored kids. In 1670, a choirmaster in Germany bent them into the shape of a shepherd's crook, purely to give restless choir boys something to do with their hands during long services. It wasn't a theological statement. It was a bribe to shut children up so the adults could enjoy the Mass in peace. 16. Mary rode a donkey to Bethlehem. Every school play features a heavily pregnant Mary bobbing along on a donkey while Joseph leads the way. However, the Bible never mentions a donkey, a camel, or even a horse. In biblical times, donkeys were the luxury SUVs of the day, and a poor carpenter likely couldn't afford one. This implies that a 9 months pregnant woman probably walked about 80 to 90 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem over rough terrain. The donkey was added by later artists because the idea of the Mother of God hiking for a week with swollen ankles ruined the serene aesthetic. But the reality is that Mary was essentially an ultra-marathon walker. 17. St. Bernard dogs carry brandy to save frozen travelers. We all have that cartoonish image of a big fluffy dog with a barrel of alcohol around its neck rescuing people in the Alps. If a dog actually brought you brandy while you were freezing to death, that dog would be an accomplice to your murder. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It makes your blood rush to your skin, making you feel warm for a few minutes while your internal body temperature plummets rapidly. Drinking booze in a snowstorm is the fastest way to get hypothermia and die. The barrel myth was entirely invented by a 19th century artist named Edwin Landseer, who just thought the keg looked cute. Real rescue monks never used them, presumably because they wanted the travelers to survive the night. 18. The elf on the shelf is a beloved ancient tradition. Parents love to tell their kids that the little spy doll on the mantelpiece has been watching families for generations, but this is a total lie. This timeless classic was actually invented in 2005 by a mother-daughter team who wrote a book to sell a toy. It isn't folklore. It is a brilliant marketing scheme designed to normalize a surveillance state inside your living room. Before 2005, nobody had an elf ratting them out to Santa. We literally let a corporation invent a new stress-inducing chore for parents, pretended it was hundreds of years old, and now we all just accept that a creepy doll is judging our every move for a month. 19. Good King Wenceslas was neither a king nor particularly successful. We sing the carol about him looking out on the feast of Stephen like he was a jolly old monarch. But the real Wenceslas was merely a Duke of Bohemia in the 10th century. While he was a nice enough guy who tried to spread Christianity, his reign ended abruptly when his own brother, Boleslaus the Cruel, grew tired of his nice guy attitude and murdered him. The song paints a picture of a wise, elderly ruler trekking through the snow. But in reality, he was a young man who got stabbed by his sibling for being too soft. It is a catchy tune, but historically, it is a song about a guy who finished last. 20. The Bible encourages putting up a Christmas tree. If you think your decorated pine tree is a holy symbol approved by Scripture, you are in for a rude awakening. The Bible actually contains passages, specifically in the Old Testament, that warn against cutting down a tree from the forest and decorating it with silver and gold. It describes this custom as a heathen practice that is vain and foolish. So, ironically, the most iconic symbol of Christian Christmas celebration is technically condemned in the very book people claim to be celebrating. Every time you hang a shiny ornament on a cut tree, you are essentially ignoring the instruction manual. 21. Sugar plums are actual plums covered in sugar. We hear about visions of sugar plums dancing in children's heads, and we assume it's a fruit. In reality, a traditional sugar plum contains no plum whatsoever. In the 17th century, the term referred to a hardened candy made of sugar layered around a seed or a nut, like a coriander seed or an almond. The word plum was just slang for anything good or desirable. So the most famous Christmas treat in poetry is actually a hard, jaw-breaking lump of spiced sugar and seeds. If you gave a modern child a real sugar plum, they would probably spit it out and ask where the chocolate is. 22. Mrs. Claus has always been Santa's partner. We can't imagine Santa without his white-haired, cookie-baking wife, but for most of history, Saint Nick was a confirmed bachelor. He went centuries without a partner in folklore. Mrs. Claus was invented in the mid-19th century by writers who felt that a lonely old man breaking into houses to watch children sleep was starting to seem a little bit creepy. They gave him a wife to domesticate his image and make him seem like a kindly grandfather rather than a weird hermit. She wasn't born from mythology. She was created as a PR fix to keep Santa from looking like a stalker. 23. The 12 Days of Christmas is a secret religious code. You will see this nonsense shared on Facebook every year. The claim that persecuted Catholics created the song to hide their doctrine, with the partridge being Jesus and the 5 golden rings being the Torah. This is a complete fabrication that didn't even exist until the 1990s. The song was actually just a secular memory and forfeits game played at parties. If you messed up the lyrics while singing, you had to pay a penalty, like kissing someone or buying a round of drinks. It wasn't a subversive underground catechism. It was essentially a 19th century drinking game designed to make people look stupid in front of their friends. 24. Penguins live at the North Pole with Santa. Every year, cartoons and greeting cards show cute little penguins sliding around Santa's workshop, high-fiving polar bears. Geographically, this is impossible. Penguins live almost exclusively in the southern hemisphere, primarily in Antarctica, while polar bears and Santa live in the Arctic North. They are literally on opposite ends of the Earth. If a penguin and a polar bear ever met, it wouldn't be a cute Coca-Cola commercial. It would be an ecological disaster. We have simply decided that all snow animals are friends and lumped them together because checking a map is apparently too hard for holiday illustrators. 25. Eggnog has always been a delicious, milky treat. Today's eggnog is basically a vanilla milkshake, but the original version was a medieval nightmare called posset. It was a hot drink made from curdled milk mixed with ale or wine and stale bread. Yes, you were essentially drinking hot, chunky beer milk sludge. Monks eventually added eggs and figs to the mix, and wealthy aristocrats added expensive sherry to show off their money. It wasn't designed to taste good. It was designed to be a heavy, calorie-dense calorie bomb to keep you from freezing to death in a castle with no heating. We only pretend to like it now because we drown it in nutmeg and sugar. 26. Boxing Day is about returning gifts or fighting. For Americans, the day after Christmas is just December 26th, but in the UK and Commonwealth, it's Boxing Day. Many assume it's named after pugilism or the modern tradition of wrestling with boxes of returns. In reality, it was a classist holiday where the rich would box up their leftovers, old clothes, and unwanted items to give to their servants and tradespeople. It was essentially National Regifting Day, where the wealthy felt generous by handing out their trash to the people who had spent the entire previous day cooking their turkeys. It wasn't about sport. It was about condescending charity. 27. Frosty. The snowman is a Christmas character. Just like Jingle Bells, the song Frosty the Snowman has absolutely zero to do with the Christmas holiday. Listen to the lyrics closely. There is no mention of December 25th, Santa, presents, or trees. It is simply a story about some kids who find a cursed hat that brings a snow golem to life, and then he runs away before he melts. It is essentially a supernatural thriller about temporary artificial life. We just dragged Frosty into the Christmas canon because he is made of snow, and we needed more mascots to put on wrapping paper, even though his story is technically just a winter weather report gone wrong. 28. President Teddy Roosevelt banned Christmas trees from the White House. The story goes that the famous conservationist refused to display a cut tree because he wanted to set an example about preserving forests. It sounds like a noble environmental stand, but history tells a funnier story. Roosevelt didn't really care that much. He just didn't have the habit of putting one up. However, his son Archie defied the ban and smuggled a small tree into a sewing closet, decorating it in secret. When the president found out, he wasn't angry about the environment. He was just amused. The ban wasn't a federal policy. It was just a dad trying to keep his house clean, and his kids completely ignored him. 29. Hanging stockings by the fireplace has a horrific backstory. We think of it as a cute tradition where we get candy and small gifts, but the origin is rooted in extreme poverty. The legend dates back to Saint Nicholas, who heard of a poor widower with 3 daughters. The father had no money for dowries, which meant the girls were destined to be sold into servitude or slavery just to survive. To prevent this, Nicholas dropped bags of gold down the chimney at night to remain anonymous. The gold coincidentally landed in the girls' laundry, specifically their stockings, drying by the fire. So, when you hang your sock on the mantle, you are actually reenacting a desperate rescue mission to keep 3 young women out of a terrible fate. 30. Silent Night was written to be a masterpiece. We imagine this song was composed in a moment of pure, divine inspiration to capture the silence of the Holy Night. The reality is much more practical. The church organ was broken. In 1818, just before Christmas Eve in Austria, the church mice had reportedly chewed through the bellows of the organ, rendering it useless. The priest, Joseph Moore, needed a song that could be played on a guitar, which was considered a lowly tavern instrument at the time. Silent Night wasn't written to be a global hit. It was a last-minute panic fix because the expensive equipment failed, and they had to improvise with an acoustic set. 31. Fruitcake is designed to be eaten immediately. Everyone jokes about fruitcake being as hard as a brick, but historically, that was the entire point. In Roman times and the Middle Ages, fruitcake wasn't a dessert. It was an energy bar for soldiers and crusaders. It was packed with sugar and alcohol specifically so it wouldn't spoil during long travels across continents. The reason your grandmother's fruitcake tastes like it has been sitting in a closet for 3 years is that the recipe was literally designed to last for 3 years. We are basically serving military-grade survival rations at a holiday party and wondering why it doesn't taste like a fluffy sponge cake. 32. Caroling was originally about spreading joy to neighbors. We picture polite choirs singing "Joy to the World" on doorsteps. But the original practice, known as wassailing, was basically aggressive begging. In feudal times, peasants would go to the homes of their rich lords and sing loudly, demanding food and booze in exchange for their blessings. The lyrics of "We wish you a Merry Christmas" give this away when they sing, "We won't go until we get some." That wasn't a joke, it was a threat. They would literally stand on the lawn and refuse to stop making noise until the homeowner paid them off with figgy pudding or strong drink. San. 33. The Feast of the 7 Fishes is a deeply Italian tradition. If you ask an Italian American, they will tell you that eating 7 seafood dishes on Christmas Eve is the most authentic thing you can do. However, if you go to Italy and ask a local about it, they will look at you with confusion. While Italians do eat fish on Christmas Eve to avoid meat, the specific 7 fishes tradition is almost entirely an American invention. It was created by immigrants who wanted to celebrate their heritage and turned a simple dietary rule into a massive buffet. It is about as authentically Italian as pepperoni pizza, a delicious tradition, but one that was definitely made in the USA. 34. Sending Christmas cards was invented purely out of laziness. We think of sending cards as a thoughtful, personal gesture to connect with loved ones, but the tradition started in 1843 because a British civil servant named Sir Henry Cole was simply too busy to write letters. He had too many friends and not enough time, which in Victorian England was a major social faux pas. Instead of writing personal notes, he hired an artist to design a generic card, printed 1,000 copies, and just signed his name at the bottom. It wasn't about spreading holiday cheer, it was an efficiency hack to clear his inbox. Basically, the first Christmas card was the 19th century equivalent of a mass copy-paste email to get people off your back. 35. Gift wrapping has always been part of the surprise. We spend hours struggling with tape and paper, assuming this is how gifts have always been given. In reality, wrapping paper is a very recent luxury. Until the late 19th century, gifts were simply hidden in pockets, placed on chairs, or just handed over naked. The idea of wasting expensive paper just to tear it up was considered ridiculous. The modern wrapping paper industry was accidentally invented by the Hall brothers, founders of Hallmark, in 1917 when they ran out of tissue paper and started selling fancy French envelope liners instead. People loved it, and suddenly a massive industry was born purely because a store ran out of the cheap stuff. 36. Tinsel was originally a massive flex for the wealthy. Today, tinsel is that cheap, scratchy plastic stuff you buy for $1. But when it was invented in Germany in the early 1600s, it was made of real silver. It was hammered into thin strips to reflect the candlelight and show off how rich you were. The problem was that silver tarnishes, so after a few hours with candles nearby, the beautiful decoration would turn black and ugly. Lead was later used, but it was heavy and toxic. So, the original tradition involved hanging expensive precious metals on a dead tree until they turned black, proving that rich people have always spent money on ridiculous things just to impress their neighbors. 37. Getting coal in your stocking wasn't originally an insult. We use the threat of a lump of coal to terrify naughty children, implying they get trash instead of toys. But in the 19th century, specifically for poor families in cold climates, coal was actually a genuinely useful gift. It meant fuel, heat, and survival. If a child in a freezing tenement found a lump of coal in their sock, it didn't mean Santa hated them. It meant the family could actually use the stove that day. The idea of it being a punishment only started when we became privileged enough to take central heating for granted and view free energy as a piece of dirty rock. 38. Scotland banned Christmas for 400 years. We associate the UK with Dickens and the Victorian Christmas aesthetic, but for centuries, Christmas was actually illegal in Scotland. Following the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the Presbyterian Church outlawed the holiday, viewing it as a popish Catholic festival full of excess. It wasn't just frowned upon, baking mincemeat pies was a crime. Astonishingly, Christmas Day didn't even become a designated public bank holiday in Scotland until 1958. For generations, Scots just went to work on December 25th, as if it were a normal Tuesday, while the rest of the world was opening presents. 39. Electric Christmas lights were a status symbol for the 1%. When Thomas Edison's partner, Edward Johnson, first strung electric lights on a tree in 1882, it wasn't a safety measure. It was a massive display of wealth. Before electricity, people used wax candles, which were cheap but occasionally burned the house down. Early electric lights, however, were so expensive that wiring a single tree cost the modern equivalent of about $2,000. You needed a generator and a dedicated electrician just to keep them running. For decades, having electric lights didn't mean you had holiday spirit. It meant you were rich enough to pay a private utility company to light up your living room. 40. Christmas was never meant to be a family holiday. We are constantly told that Christmas is about staying home with family, sitting by the fire, and being quiet. This is a Victorian invention designed to get people off the streets. For most of history, Christmas was a rowdy public street festival, similar to Mardi Gras, filled with gambling, drinking, and mobs of people going door to door demanding food. It was loud, chaotic, and decidedly not kid-friendly. In the 19th century, Queen Victoria and authors like Charles Dickens launched a PR campaign to domesticate the holiday, convincing everyone to go inside and shut the door. The Cozy Family Christmas was literally created to stop the police from having to arrest carousers. Now that you know how many Christmas facts were completely made up, here's the real question. Which myth do you still refuse to give up even after hearing the truth? Drop it in the comments. I want to see who's brave enough to admit it. And if you want more myth-breaking chaos like this, hit subscribe and attack that like button before another tradition lies to you again.